The rain tapped softly on the glass, forming tiny rivers that slid down and merged at the sill. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, watching the steam rise in delicate swirls. It was one of those evenings when silence felt both comforting and heavy. The waitress had already brought him his usual meal, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and peas, and offered him a polite smile before walking off to tend to the only other customer at the counter. He had planned to eat alone, as he had been doing for months now. Solitude had become his companion after the long days at the factory, after the quiet nights at home where no one waited for him anymore. He didn't mind the silence, or so he told himself. It was predictable. It didn't ask questions. It didn't remind him of what he had lost. He lifted his fork, took the first bite, and let the warm food settle in his stomach. The rain outside grew heavier, the drops now hitting the pavement with more force. Through the foggy window, he could see blurred shapes moving quickly under umbrellas, strangers hurrying to wherever they needed to be. The world seemed to rush past him, but he was in no hurry. He had nowhere to go except home, a small apartment that smelled faintly of dust and old newspapers. Just as he reached for his coffee again, the bell above the diner door jingled. He looked up out of habit. A woman stepped inside, her coat soaked through, holding the hand of a small boy who couldn't have been more than 6. The boy's shoes made soft, squeaking sounds against the tile floor as they entered. The woman's face was tired, her hair damp and sticking to her forehead. She looked around, hesitating, as though unsure if they should be there. The waitress came over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Evenin'," she said gently. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled nervously. I'm sorry to bother you. My son's hungry and we've been walking for a while. I don't have much, but if it's okay, could we stay a while? Maybe just get him something small to eat." The waitress hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the man at the corner table, then back at the woman. It wasn't a fancy place, but even here, rules were rules. The woman's coat was worn, her shoes muddy, her voice trembling. The man watched quietly, his fork hovering above his plate. Something about the child's small frame, the way he clung to his mother's hand, tugged at him unexpectedly. The waitress finally nodded. "You can sit anywhere you'd like, hun. We'll figure something out." The woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. She led the boy toward a booth near the door, not far from where the man sat. The boy looked around with wide eyes, taking in the smell of coffee and frying bacon, the hum of the old jukebox in the corner. He pressed his nose against the menu, even though he couldn't read most of the words. The man looked down at his food again, but his appetite had shifted. He could hear their soft conversation. "Mom, can I get pancakes?" the boy asked, his voice full of innocent hope. "We'll see," the mother said softly, flipping through the menu though she clearly wasn't really reading it. "Maybe something smaller." He heard the tremor in her tone, the kind that comes from someone trying not to disappoint a child, even when the truth is sitting heavy in their chest. He felt something stir in him, an impulse he hadn't felt in a long time. Without thinking much, he signaled to the waitress when she passed by. "Can you bring them something?" he asked quietly. "Same for the kid, add it to my bill." The waitress gave him a look, half surprise, half warmth. "You sure?" He nodded. "Yeah, don't tell them it's from me." The waitress smiled faintly and went to the counter. He went back to his meal, pretending not to listen, but his ears caught every sound. The clatter of plates, the boy's soft laugh when the food arrived, the mother's startled whisper to the waitress. "Oh, I didn't order this," she said. "It's taken care of," the waitress replied gently. "Don't worry about it." The woman's voice faltered. "By who?" "Just someone who wanted to help." There was a pause, then a quiet, trembling thank you. The man kept his eyes on his plate, pretending not to notice. He took another sip of coffee, but it tasted different now, warmer somehow, like something inside him had thawed just a little. The boy dug into his pancakes, smiling between bites. "Mom, these are the best pancakes ever." The woman laughed softly, though her eyes glistened. "I'm glad you like them, sweetheart." For a while, the diner filled with a gentle kind of warmth. The rain outside no longer seemed so harsh. The man glanced at them once, just briefly, and the woman caught his eye. She smiled, a small, tired but sincere smile. He smiled back, then quickly looked away, embarrassed. After a few minutes, the boy slid out of the booth and wandered toward the jukebox. He pressed his hands against the glass, fascinated by the glowing buttons. The man watched as the boy hesitated, then looked back at his mother for permission. She nodded, and he pressed a random number. A soft, old tune began to play, a slow melody that filled the quiet diner with a nostalgic hum. The man chuckled quietly. "Good taste," he said, half to himself. The boy turned, smiling. "I just picked one. I like how it sounds." "It's a good choice," the man said. "Used to listen to that one when I was your age." The boy tilted his head. "You're old enough to have a jukebox at home." The man laughed, the sound surprising even him. "Not quite, but they were everywhere back then." The boy grinned and ran back to his mother, whispering something that made her smile again. She looked at the man once more, this time with a softness that said more than words could. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition of loneliness meeting kindness. When he finished his meal, he paid the bill, quietly including their food. The waitress leaned closer and said, "You did a good thing tonight." He shook his head. "Just dinner." "Doesn't seem like just dinner to them," she said gently. He gave a small nod and turned to leave, but just as he reached the door, he heard the mother's voice behind him. "Sir." He turned. She stood up, holding her son's hand. "I don't know how to thank you." He smiled awkwardly. "You don't need to." "I do," she said softly. "You didn't have to do that. We've had a rough few days, and you made him smile for the first time in a while." He looked at the boy, who was still chewing the last bite of pancake, and something about the way the child looked at him made his chest tighten. "Glad to hear it," he said. The mother hesitated. "If I could repay you somehow." "Don't worry about it," he said. "Just take care of him." She nodded, and for a moment, their eyes held. Two strangers who somehow understood each other without needing to explain anything. He stepped outside, pulling his jacket tighter against the chill. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. He stood for a moment under the flickering diner sign, listening to the muted hum of traffic, and then started walking toward home. But halfway down the street, he stopped. For some reason, he didn't feel like going home just yet. He turned back toward the diner window, where he could see the mother and her son still sitting at the booth, talking quietly. The boy was laughing now, gesturing with his hands as he told some story. The woman looked different, still tired but lighter, her shoulders not so burdened. He stood there watching for a while, unnoticed, until the waitress came and refilled their cups of hot chocolate. Then he smiled faintly and walked on. That night, his apartment didn't feel as empty as usual. The silence didn't echo quite the same way. He made himself another cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the lights of passing cars. He thought about the boy's smile, the mother's eyes, the way small kindness could ripple out without warning. The next evening, he returned to the diner again, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. The same waitress greeted him with a knowing smile. "Back again, huh?" "Guess I am," he said, sitting down. "Same as yesterday." As he waited for his meal, he glanced toward the booth near the door. It was empty now, but for some reason it still felt like it held something, a trace of warmth left behind. A few days passed. Life returned to its rhythm: work, coffee, silence. But he found himself noticing things he hadn't before. The old man at the bus stop who always fed the pigeons, the neighbor who carried groceries for the lady upstairs, the smile from the cashier who remembered his name. It was as if that one small moment in the diner had peeled back something in him, something he'd forgotten he still had. Then one rainy evening about a week later, he walked into the diner again, and there they were. The mother and her son, sitting at the same booth, this time dry and smiling, the boy coloring on a paper placemat with crayons. The woman looked up and saw him. She smiled warmly. "Hey," she said, "I didn't expect to see you again." He hesitated, then smiled back. "Couldn't resist the meatloaf." The boy waved his crayon. "Hi, mister. Mom got a job today." He blinked, then smiled wider. "That's so." The woman nodded. "Just a few hours at the grocery store, but it's a start. Things are looking up." "That's great," he said genuinely. Congratulations. The waitress came over, balancing plates. You folks know each other now, huh? The woman laughed. We do, kind of. He's the reason we're here tonight. My son wanted to celebrate where he had the best pancakes ever. The man chuckled. Well, that's as good a reason as any. The boy climbed out of the booth and came to his table. You eating alone again? He asked innocently. Yeah, the man said. Old habit. The boy frowned. You shouldn't. Food tastes better when you share it. He laughed softly. Is that so? The boy nodded seriously. Mom says everything's better when you share. The woman smiled from her booth, shaking her head in mock embarrassment. He talks a lot. The man looked at her, then at the empty seat across from him. Well, he said slowly, if you two don't mind, maybe you could join me this time. Her eyes softened. Are you sure? Yeah, he said. I'd like that. The boy beamed and ran back to grab his mother's hand. They slid into the booth opposite him, the waitress smiling as she brought over extra silverware. The conversation flowed easily, small things at first, about the rain, the diner, the town. Then deeper things, the boy's school, her plans, his work. For the first time in a long while, laughter filled his table again. The boy told stories about his favorite cartoons. The mother shared little jokes about her new job, and he found himself smiling more than he had in years. When the plates were cleared, the boy leaned against his mother, sleepy but happy. She thanked him again, quietly. You didn't just feed us that night, she said. You reminded me that kindness still exists. He hesitated, then said, You reminded me too. She looked at him, puzzled. Reminded you of what? He smiled faintly. That I'm not as alone as I thought. The boy yawned, his head resting on her shoulder. The waitress refilled their coffee cups one last time before closing. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The world seemed washed clean, fresh again. As they stood to leave, the boy hugged him suddenly, his small arms wrapping around his waist. Thanks, mister. He froze for a second, then placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. You take care of your mom, all right. I will, the boy said with sleepy confidence. The woman smiled softly. Good night. Good night, he said, watching as they stepped out into the cool night, the streetlights glinting off the wet pavement. He sat back down, his heart strangely full. He realized then that kindness didn't just feed the hungry, it fed the lonely too. And that sometimes, the simplest gesture could bridge two worlds that had both been quietly waiting for warmth. He thought he'd eat alone that night, as always. But now, he knew he never really had to again.